Lagos was a city of contradictions, blinding wealth and quiet suffering, sprawling mansions and hidden secrets. Zainab Adebayo had grown up in one of the most luxurious homes in Ikoyi, surrounded by grand chandeliers, gold-plated dining sets, and the scent of imported perfume that never seemed to fade. Yet, despite the privilege, the house felt less like a home and more like a beautifully decorated prison. At 17, Zainab should have felt safe within these walls, but she didn't. Not anymore. Her mother, Adebayo, known to everyone as Madam Bayo, was a woman who wore her wealth like armor. She was ruthless, calculating, and fiercely protective of her status. To Madam Bayo, love was a frivolous emotion, a weakness that could derail one's climb to the top. She had built her empire on cold pragmatism, and she expected nothing less from her daughter. Wealth comes at a price, Zainab, Madam Bayo would often say, her voice sharp and unyielding as she adjusted her gold bangles. You think life is fair? No. You must learn to pay the price if you want to survive. But for Zainab, the price felt too high, her freedom, her dreams, and her sense of safety. Then there was Chief Olumide, her stepfather. He was charming, influential, a man whose name carried weight in the corridors of power. On the outside, he was the picture of generosity and charisma, always hosting lavish parties and making grand gestures. But behind closed doors, there was something unsettling about him. Zainab had always been wary of him, but lately, she had noticed things that made her skin crawl. His eyes lingered too long when she walked past. He showered her with extravagant compliments that felt wrong. You are growing into such a beautiful woman, Zainab, he would say, his gaze drifting lower than it should. Even her clothes, once ignored, were suddenly a topic of discussion. That dress suits you, my dear. But maybe something a little shorter next time. Zainab would laugh it off, but deep down, her gut told her something was very, very wrong. I want to study in the UK, Zainab announced one evening during dinner, her voice trembling but determined. I've been researching scholarships, and I think I have a chance. Madam Bayo laughed, a cold, mocking sound that echoed through the dining room. Scholarships. Do you think the world will hand you anything? You'll learn soon enough that life is not so kind. Chief Olumide smirked, his eyes narrowing as he leaned back in his chair. Why go so far, Zainab? Nigeria has everything you need. Stay close to family. Zainab clenched her fist under the table, her nails digging into her palms. She wanted to scream, to tell them how trapped she felt, but the words stuck in her throat. As the days turned into months, Zainab began to notice the cracks in the facade of her seemingly perfect life. Chief Olumide's behavior grew bolder, his presence more oppressive. Madam Bayo's words, once dismissive, now carried a sinister undertone. Women must learn to endure, Madam Bayo said one night, her voice low as she sipped her wine. Sacrifice is part of our destiny. You'll understand when you're older. One evening, as she was passing through the hallway, the housemaid, Aisha, stopped her. The older woman had worked for the family for years, and though she rarely spoke out of turn, there was worry in her eyes. Aisha glanced over her shoulder before whispering, Miss Zainab, be careful. Your stepfather, he is not who he seems. Zainab's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded. The air in the mansion suddenly felt too thick, the walls too close. She had always felt uneasy around Chief Olumide. But this was something else. For the first time, she realized, she was not just uncomfortable, she was in danger. The evening air was thick with the scent of jasmine and expensive perfume. The sitting room, one of the many lavish spaces in the Adebayo mansion, was dimly lit by a grand chandelier, its crystals casting flickering golden light across the room. The walls, adorned with imported paintings, exuded luxury, yet Zainab felt a chill crawl up her spine as she stepped inside. Her mother, Madam Bayo, sat elegantly on the cream-colored sofa, a glass of champagne resting between her manicured fingers. The ice clinked softly against the crystal as she swallowed the golden liquid, her movements deliberate, her expression unreadable. She was dressed in a flowing silk robe, her gold jewelry catching the light, giving her an almost regal presence. But to Zainab, she had never looked more distant, more like a stranger than a mother. "Zainab, sit down. We need to talk," Madame Beo said, her voice smooth and commanding. Zainab hesitated but lowered herself onto the chair opposite her mother, her muscles tense. Something in the air felt off. The way Madame Beo's eyes studied her, calculating, assessing, sent a ripple of unease through her. There was a moment of silence before Madame Beo finally spoke. "Chief Olumide has been good to us," she began, her tone unnervingly casual. "It's time you repay his kindness." Zainab blinked, confusion twisting her features. "Repay? How?" she asked, a wary edge in her voice. Madame Beo exhaled as though she had anticipated the question, then set down her glass. "He has desires, Zainab," she said, her voice void of any emotion. "And you can make things easier for us all." The words hit Zainab like a slap. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. Her chest tightened, her breath catching in her throat. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Madame Beo remained composed, her face betraying no hint of shame or regret. "This is not unusual, Zainab. Many powerful men have needs. It is a privilege, really." The room tilted around her. Her mother, her own mother, was telling her to. "What? You're insane." Zainab spat, her heart slamming against her ribs. "He's my stepfather." Madame Beo's expression hardened. The warmth in her eyes, the fake motherly concern, vanished in an instant. "You're being ungrateful," she said coldly. "A man like him doesn't ask twice. You will do this." Zainab's breath came in short gasps. Her mind raced, trying to grasp the reality of what was happening. "No," she said, shaking her head violently. "No, never." Madame Beo leaned forward, her gold bracelets clinking together. "Think carefully, Zainab. He holds our future in his hands. If you refuse, we lose everything." Zainab's stomach twisted. Everything? Was this about money? Power? Madame Beo's eyes narrowed, her patience wearing thin. "I raised you. I gave you everything. You owe me. I owe you." Zainab screamed, her voice breaking. "You're a monster. How could you do this to me? How could you even consider it?" The slap came without warning, sharp and stinging. Zainab stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek as tears welled up in her eyes. Madame Beo stood tall, her face a mask of icy resolve. "Enough," Madame Beo said coldly. "You will do as you're told. This is not a discussion." Tears burned in her eyes as she realized, to her mother, she was nothing more than currency. Without another word, she bolted from the chair and ran. Her heartbeat roared in her ears as she reached her room, slamming the door shut, locking it. Her hands trembled as she pressed herself against the door, as if she could keep the entire world out. For the first time in her life, Zainab truly understood. She was not safe in her own home. The night was quiet, the distant hum of Lagos traffic barely reaching the heavily gated estate. Zainab's pulse pounded in her ears as she hurriedly shoved clothes into her backpack. Her hands trembled as she zipped it shut, slinging it over her shoulder. Her mind screamed at her to move faster. If she didn't leave now, she might never get another chance. With one last glance at the grand room she had always called her own, a room that now felt like a gilded cage, she eased open the door, listening carefully. The hall was dark. Silent. Her bare feet padded against the cool marble floors as she crept past the grand staircase, holding her breath when she heard a faint noise from the other wing of the house. Madame Beo was still awake. Zainab swallowed hard and forced herself to keep moving. The front door loomed ahead, and she reached for it, slipping out into the cool night air. The estate was surrounded by high walls, security cameras, and guards, but she had studied their patterns over the years. Moving swiftly, she kept to the shadows, slipping through the side garden and climbing over the back fence, her hands scraped and raw by the time she landed on the other side. She ran. The city lights flickered in the distance, and Zainab ran as fast as her legs would carry her, the humid air clinging to her skin. She didn't stop until she reached the familiar iron gate of Amina's house. Panting, she knocked urgently. A few moments later, Amina's face appeared through the security panel, eyes widening in shock. Zainab. What? Please, Amina, Zainab whispered, her voice desperate. Let me in. Without hesitation, Amina unlocked the gate, pulling Zainab inside. They sat on the edge of Amina's bed, the dim glow of a bedside lamp casting long shadows on the wall. Zainab, still breathless, told her everything. By the time she finished, Amina's eyes were filled with horror. This is madness, Zainab, she whispered, gripping her friend's hands. We have to call someone. Zainab nodded hesitantly, but a sinking feeling twisted in her gut. Who could they call? The police. Would they even believe her? But before they could decide, a knock at the door interrupted them. Amina's father stepped inside, his face clouded with concern. What's going on? He asked, his eyes darting between them. Amina, unable to hide her distress, blurted out, Baba, Zainab needs help. Chief Olimide, he's trying to. But before she could finish, her father's face turned pale. A long silence stretched between them before he sighed heavily. Chief Olimide is too powerful, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We cannot get involved. Zainab felt the air leave her lungs. What? She choked out. Amina's mother appeared behind him, shaking her head. We are sorry, Zainab, she murmured. But this is not something we can fight. Zainab stared at them in disbelief. Even money could buy silence. Tears burned in her eyes as she turned back to Amina, but her friend looked just as helpless. Zainab, I don't know what to do, Amina stammered, guilt written all over her face. Zainab already knew. There was nothing anyone would do. The weight of that realization crushed her. With no other options, she forced herself to stand, her body numb, her chest aching. I should go, she whispered. Amina grabbed her arm. No, wait. But Zainab shook her head. I have no choice. She stepped past Amina's parents and walked to the door, her feet feeling heavier with every step. The walk back to her house felt even longer. Every step was a defeat. By the time she pushed open the front door, Madame Beo was waiting. She was seated in her grand leather chair, her legs crossed, her fingers tapping lazily against the armrest. The moment their eyes met, Madame Beo smiled, a slow, cold, knowing smile. I knew you'd come back, she said smoothly. You have no one, Zainab. Just us. Zainab's stomach twisted. She was completely alone. Zainab woke up to an eerie silence. The warm morning sun filtered through the curtains, but instead of its usual comfort, it felt mocking, suffocating. She reached for her phone on the nightstand out of habit, but it was gone. Her heart pounded as she frantically searched under the pillow, in the sheets, even under the bed. Nothing. She swung her legs off the mattress and stumbled toward her desk, switching on her laptop. No internet. Her breath hitched. This wasn't a coincidence. Her mother had done this. A heavy sense of dread settled over her as she made her way downstairs. She found Madame Beo sipping coffee in the dining room, scrolling through her phone as if everything was normal. "Where's my phone?" Zainab demanded, her voice sharp. Madame Beo didn't look up. She took a slow sip before finally speaking. "You won't be needing it anymore." Zainab's stomach clenched. "You had no right," she snapped. "You don't need it," Madame Beo said, not even looking up from her magazine. "You'll only get distracted. Focus on what's important." Madame Beo's eyes flicked up then, calm, cold, unreadable. "You will not be speaking to anyone, Zainab. No calls. No emails. No unnecessary distractions. You will stay here and do what is expected of you." Zainab's breath came fast, anger battling with terror. "Expected?" she hissed, her fingers curling into fist. Before her mother could answer, a voice came from behind her. "Why fight it, my dear?" Zainab's blood ran cold. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Chief Olimide. His presence filled the space, his cologne, rich, woody, overbearing, turning her stomach. Slowly, she turned to face him. His smile was smooth. His eyes held no shame. "Your mother already agreed," he continued, like he was talking about an arranged marriage, not a nightmare. Zainab's entire body went rigid. Her mother had agreed. She felt her stomach churn, bile rising in her throat. She wanted to scream, to claw at him, to throw something, anything. Instead, she ran. Back up the stairs, back to her room, back to whatever safety the locked door could provide. She shut herself inside and pressed her back against the wood, her breath ragged. The walls felt like they were closing in. Panic clawed at her throat, but she forced herself to stay still. Think. Think. The truth was undeniable now, there was no one coming to save her. She refused to cry. Instead, she stopped eating. For the next 2 days, she barely touched the food left outside her door. She spent the hours curled up in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting. For what, she didn't know. On the 3rd day, her mother's voice came from the other side of the door. "A girl like you has no power, Zainab. Just accept your place." Zainab closed her eyes, her fist clenching the bedsheets. No. She would never accept this. She was trapped, yes. But she was not broken. Not yet. The days turned into weeks, and Zainab's isolation grew more pronounced. She spent hours staring out the window, watching the world go by as if it were a distant dream. The mansion, once a symbol of luxury, now felt like a prison, its opulence a cruel reminder of the chains that bound her. The night air was thick with silence. The heavy curtains in Zainab's room barely moved, suffocating the space in darkness. She lay on her bed, drained, weak, and starving. Days without eating had left her feeling lightheaded, but she didn't care. She was done fighting. Or at least, that's what she told herself. A faint creak pulled her from her daze. The bedroom door swung open. Madame Beo stepped inside, her expression calm, but her eyes cold. In her hands, she held a designer dress, silk, deep blue, elegant. She walked over and placed it on the bed as though presenting a gift. "Put this on," she said smoothly, her voice almost gentle. "Chief Olimide is waiting." Zainab's entire body stiffened. Her mother wasn't asking. Slowly, she sat up, her hands shaking, her breathing shallow. She stared at the dress, then at her mother. "You are a monster," she whispered, her voice raw with disgust. Something inside Madame Beo snapped. The slap came hard and fast. Zainab's head jerked to the side, her cheek burning, a sharp sting radiating down her jaw. "You will do this?" Madame Beo hissed, her patience gone. For the first time, Zainab saw it, the desperation behind her mother's cruelty. Madame Beyo had built her entire empire on men like Chief Olimide. And now, she was willing to throw her own daughter into the fire to keep it. I hate you, Zainab spat, her voice shaking. I will never do this. Madame Beyo's face twisted in fury. With unexpected strength, she grabbed Zainab's arm and yanked her off the bed. Zainab screamed, kicking wildly. But her mother was stronger. Stop fighting. Madame Beyo snapped as she dragged Zainab toward the door. This is your life now. Panic surged through Zainab's veins. She thrashed, clawed, twisted, trying anything to break free. Her nails raked across her mother's wrist, drawing blood. Madame Beyo yelped in pain, loosening her grip for a split second, just enough for Zainab to break free. She stumbled backward, heart racing, mind screaming for an escape. And then she saw it. Sitting on the polished mahogany desk in Chief Olimide's study, a heavy glass award. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She lunged for it, gripping the cold, solid weight in her hands. Footsteps thundered behind her. Chief Olimide. Come now, my dear, he purred, a sickening smirk on his face. You don't have to be so dramatic. Zainab turned, her eyes wild with fear, rage, and defiance. As he reached for her, she swung. The glass award smashed against his skull with a sickening crack. For a second, everything was still. Chief Olumide's eyes widened in shock before his knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the marble floor. Blood trickled down his forehead, staining the white fabric of his expensive robe. Madame Beyo screamed. What have you done? But Zainab wasn't listening. Her body was moving on instinct, fueled by sheer survival. She turned and ran. Barefoot, she tore through the grand hallway, past the towering chandeliers, past the expensive vases and paintings her mother had spent years collecting. None of it mattered. Nothing mattered except getting out. The front doors loomed ahead. Behind her, Madame Beyo's voice rang out, shrieking, furious. Zainab! Come back here. She didn't stop. She yanked open the doors and bolted into the freezing night. The cold air bit into her skin as she sprinted down the driveway. Her feet pounded against the pavement, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The estate gates loomed ahead, locked. Her only way out was climbing. Ignoring the sharp pain in her legs, she scrambled up the iron bars, her muscles screaming in protest. Behind her, she heard the mansion's doors swing open. Madame Beyo's voice tore through the air. Guards! Stop her! Zainab threw herself over the gate, landing hard on the other side. The impact jarred her bones, but she barely felt it. She pushed herself up and ran. Into the dark, into the unknown. For the first time in her life, she was free. The night air was sharp against Zainab's skin as she ran, barefoot and breathless. Her heart pounded like a war drum, her vision blurred by tears and exhaustion. The grand estate of Ikoyi blurred past her, their tall iron gates and high walls offering nothing but silence. She kept running. Her feet stung from cuts on the rough pavement, but she barely felt them. All she could think about was getting away. Away from the house, away from Madame Beyo, away from Chief Olumide's bloody face on the marble floor. The city was quieter at this hour, the streets mostly empty. The usual honking of cars had died down, replaced by the distant hum of generators and the occasional barking of stray dogs. She didn't stop until she saw it, a police station. The dull, flickering light above the entrance cast long shadows across the pavement. Her last hope. With what little strength she had left, she stumbled inside. The air smelled of coffee and old paper. A tired-looking officer sat behind the desk, scrolling through his phone, barely glancing up when she entered. Zainab collapsed against the counter, panting. Help me, she gasped, her voice raw. The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "What is it?" he asked, setting his phone down. Zainab gripped the edge of the counter, her hands trembling. "My stepfather," she choked out. "Chief Olumide." He tried to, she couldn't even finish the sentence. The officer's expression shifted slightly, but not to concern. To skepticism. "Chief Olumide," he repeated, his tone laced with doubt. Zainab nodded frantically. "And you're accusing him of what, exactly?" He tried to, "My mother," her words stumbled out in broken pieces. The officer leaned back in his chair, sighing. "You're accusing a chief. Do you have proof?" Zainab felt her stomach drop. Proof? She had none. No recordings. No witnesses. Just her word against one of the most powerful men in Lagos. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She felt her knees go weak. She had risked everything, and they didn't believe her. This was it. The final betrayal. She covered her face with her hands, sobs racking her body. Then, a voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" Zainab looked up. A woman stood at the entrance to the office, tall, confident, and sharp-eyed. Her uniform was neatly pressed, her hair tucked under a police cap. She had the air of someone who did not tolerate nonsense. "Who is this?" she asked, stepping forward. "Just some girl making wild accusations," the male officer muttered. The woman's gaze flickered to Zainab, taking in her disheveled hair, bruised cheek, and bloodied feet. Her sharp eyes softened. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Zainab," she whispered. The woman nodded. "I'm Officer Halima," she said, her voice firm but kind. "You're safe now. Tell me everything." Zainab felt something shift. For the first time, someone believed her. And for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. The investigation had begun. Within hours, the Lagos police force launched a discreet but urgent probe into Chief Olumide's affairs. His wealth and influence had kept him untouchable for years, but now, the shield around him was beginning to crumble. The first discovery was chilling. Chief Olumide had a pattern. Hidden beneath his polished reputation was a trail of abused girls, ruined lives, and buried secrets. Some had been paid off, some had disappeared, and others had never spoken a word, too terrified of what would happen if they did. His business dealings were just as dirty, multiple undisclosed payments to unknown individuals. Some of the money had gone directly to Madam Beo. She hadn't just known about his crimes. She had enabled them. She had profited from them. The deeper the police dug, the darker it got. The following morning, officers arrived at the Adibeo mansion. Madam Beo was in the grand sitting room, sipping tea, as if nothing had happened. When the officers entered, she barely looked up. "How can I help you, gentlemen?" she asked smoothly, placing her cup down with a practiced elegance. The lead investigator, a stocky man with a hardened expression, stepped forward. "Madam Beo, we have reason to believe you have been involved in child endangerment, human trafficking, and conspiracy to commit abuse. We have questions for you." For the first time, a flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "How dare you come into my home with such accusations?" she said, her voice laced with venom. "Your daughter has made a formal statement against you and Chief Olumide." At that, Madam Beo laughed. A slow, mocking sound that filled the vast room. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs. "My daughter is a liar," she said simply. The officers didn't react. Instead, one of them placed a folder on the table. "Then perhaps you can explain these bank transactions." Madam Beo's smirk faltered. The evidence was overwhelming. Transactions from Chief Olumide's account, direct payments to Madam Beo. Large sums. repeatedly. Payments that coincided with the disappearance of young girls. Madame Beo's fingers curled against the armrest, but she kept her expression neutral. "You people think you can ruin me," she said, her voice now ice-cold. The lead investigator gave a slight nod. "We don't need to ruin you, Madame Beo. You did that yourself." Within minutes, the arrest warrants were signed. As Madame Beo was handcuffed, she didn't scream or fight. She simply smiled, tilting her head slightly. "Zainab will come back to me," she murmured. "She always does." But for the first time, Madame Beo was wrong. The news spread like wildfire. Chief Olumide, one of Lagos' most powerful businessmen, was a fugitive. The moment his lawyers got wind of the investigation, he had fled his mansion, leaving behind everything, including Madame Beo. For days, the police tracked his movements, following whispers of private jets and secret bank withdrawals. His plan? Escape to Ghana. But his wealth couldn't protect him anymore. At the Ghanaian border, disguised in a plain suit and dark sunglasses, he was caught. His name, once spoken with admiration in business circles, was now the talk of the streets. The mighty Chief Olumide had fallen. Meanwhile, at the Lagos High Court, Madame Beo was already in police custody, but unlike her husband, she didn't run. She sat in the interrogation room, her hands neatly folded, her expression calm. Even when she was charged with human trafficking, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit abuse, she didn't flinch. "You will never break me," she had murmured to the officers. But she was wrong. The air was thick with tension as Zainab stepped forward to testify. The courtroom was filled with journalists, social activists, and silent spectators who had come to witness the fall of a powerful man. Chief Olumide looked different now, no expensive suits, no smug smirk. Just a man in handcuffs, exposed for what he truly was. Madame Beo sat beside him, still poised, still silent. But Zainab didn't focus on them. She faced the judge, took a deep breath, and spoke. "He took everything from me," she said, her voice steady. "But I will not be silent." She recounted everything. The manipulation. The threats. The moment her mother tried to sell her. Tears filled the eyes of people in the courtroom, but Zainab never wavered. By the time she was done, the room was silent. No one doubted her now. Chief Olumide was sentenced to life in prison. Madame Beo received 25 years for her crimes. Even as the sentence was read, she refused to show emotion. No remorse. No apology. Just a cold stare as she was led away in handcuffs. But Zainab didn't need her apology. She had won. For the first time in her life, she was free. Years had passed since the night Zainab ran barefoot into the streets, desperate for escape. She was no longer that terrified girl trapped in a gilded cage, silenced by power and wealth. She had rebuilt herself, piece by piece, choosing to rise rather than be consumed by her past. Now, she stood before a crowd of hundreds, her voice no longer trembling but strong, clear, and unshakable. The event was a conference on women's rights and child protection, held in Abuja, where activists, lawmakers, and survivors had gathered to push for stricter laws against child exploitation and abuse. As she stepped onto the stage, the murmuring crowd fell silent. Zainab took a deep breath, then spoke. "There was a time I thought no one would believe me. A time when the people who were supposed to love me the most betrayed me. A time when I thought silence was my only option." She scanned the room, locking eyes with young girls in the audience who sat frozen, their own silent battles hidden behind their gazes. "But I was wrong. Silence lets evil win. Speak up. Someone will listen." A wave of emotion rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, others wiped silent tears from their cheeks. She continued. "People like my mother, like Chief Olumide, exist everywhere. They hide behind money, behind influence, behind the lie that power makes them untouchable. But the truth? They only stay powerful when we let them. Applause erupted, a roar of support filling the hall. Zainab smiled, not the broken smile of a girl who once felt powerless, but the smile of a woman who had fought back and won. She had chosen to break the cycle. And now, she was helping others do the same. As the event came to a close, young women lined up to speak to her, sharing their own stories, their own pain, their own victories. And in that moment, Zainab realized her voice was no longer just hers. It belonged to every girl who had ever been silenced. Every girl who still needed to know. There's always hope.